Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by first looking at a few editorials and columns. The first column is from page number 6, written by Mr. M.K. Narayanan, who was the former National Security Advisor of India and as well as a former director of the Intelligence Bureau. So having considerable expertise in the field of foreign policy and national security, he goes on to evaluate the changing geopolitics at the beginning of a new year. And based on it, he analyzes the current foreign policy priorities of India and concludes that the current foreign policy priorities of India are not suited for the changing dynamics of global and regional geopolitics. And he makes a case for reframing India's foreign policy priorities. First, he evaluates the changing dynamics of global geopolitics as seen in 2020. See, the most watched geopolitical development of 2020 was without a doubt the presidential elections in the United States. Because under President Trump, the United States had pursued a hostile approach towards multiple countries, and it not only aggravated tensions with traditional rivals such as China and Iran, but it was even distanced by its traditional allies in Europe, largely because of the unpredictable policies of President Trump. So considering the disruption that the Trump administration had caused in global geopolitics, many countries and strategic experts were hoping for changes under a new administration. But the author is of the opinion that this is unlikely to happen even under President Biden because the United States is currently in a state of turmoil. It has been battered by the pandemic and the excessive polarization being seen in the American society, which is a direct result of Trump's extremist policies. So internally, the racial and ethnic divide has increased in the US, and far right-wing extremism has gained traction, the impact of which has been clearly felt in the last few weeks as the US presidential election process concludes. So in short, Trump leaves behind a United States that is not just politically and socially weaker, but even its economic and democratic influence is on the decline. This is very evident from the fact that even traditional allies of the US, such as European countries, have distanced themselves from the US and they have begun embracing a closer relationship with China. So as the United States retreats as a global superpower, there is a power vacuum that is being left behind in global geopolitics, and this is being duly filled by a rising and assertive China. Even with a new administration coming in under President Biden, this ongoing realignment in global geopolitics is unlikely to change. And this becomes very clear when you look at the recently signed comprehensive agreement on investment between the European Union and China. Just a few days ago, the comprehensive agreement on investment was concluded, which largely favors China, and this clearly indicates the growing economic dependency of European countries on China. Until a few years ago, the US and the European countries, they were coordinating their strategic and economic policies to act as a counterbalance against the rising assertiveness of China. And the fact that Europe has begun to embrace China shows that Europe values its economy more than its politics and geopolitics. This also marks the decline of the alliance between US and Europe to counterbalance China. And this makes it very clear that from 2021 onwards, China is free to dominate global geopolitics, particularly the Indo-Pacific region. The emergence of a stronger China is clearly evident if you look at how China was the only major country which registered a positive rate of growth last year. Its economy is all set to grow at a faster rate in the coming years, and naturally, it has started asserting itself in the military and strategic domain as well. So as the economic and military profile of China grows, its primary focus would be on the Indo-Pacific region, and it has made its intentions clear by announcing the launch of its third aircraft carrier in 2021. So this would allow China to dominate the waters of the Indo-Pacific, which in today's world has emerged as the geopolitical and economic hub of the world. Even internally as well, China has emerged stronger despite internal problems in Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Tibet. And even within the Communist Party of China, President Xi Jinping has further cemented his position. So in line with its rising global ambitions, China has started repairing and improving its relations with traditional allies and like-minded countries such as Russia and Turkey, and this marks the rise of strong authoritarian countries. And parallelly, we are witnessing a decline of the democratic bloc, which was traditionally led by the US and Europe. Now, this is what India will have to acknowledge and contend with, especially at a time when India-China relations have been completely deteriorated as a result of the ongoing border tensions in Ladakh. Apart from the border dispute, both India and China also have a strategic competition going on in the Indo-Pacific region. And in response to this, India's attempt to seek protection from the United States in response to rising Chinese aggression has affected India's standing, and the impact of this is already being felt on Indian national interests. The growing defense and strategic ties of India with the United States is one of the factors which has led China to counter India by exerting military and strategic pressure. This has also affected India's traditional ties with Russia, and even though they continue to be close defense partners, the close strategic coordination between the two countries is no longer being witnessed. Then several global developments and India's internal developments has even affected India's ties with other important powers such as Turkey, Iran, etc. Turkey has picked unnecessary hostilities with India by directly interfering in the internal affairs of the country, and Iran feels that it has been sidelined by India under American pressure. Then if you look at the West Asia region, as the United States has retreated, Russia and China have stepped in to fill the vacuum, and they have started playing a key role in determining the geopolitics of the region. The West Asia region has already been very volatile because of the Shia-Sunni divide that is represented by the power blocs led by Saudi Arabia and Iran respectively, and the targeting of Iran by the United States is only going to further increase tensions in the region. Recently, the Trump administration championed the Abraham Accords in order to open up a new era in the relationship between Israel and Sunni countries. Under the Abraham Accords, several Sunni powers that are guided by Saudi Arabia, such as UAE, Bahrain, and even Sunni majority African countries such as Sudan and Morocco have recognized Israel and established diplomatic ties with the country. The United States under Trump championed the Abraham Accords as a peace effort intended to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict and subsequently bring down tensions between Israel and the Muslim world. But however, Mr. M.K. Narayanan feels that the Abraham Accords and the growing closeness between Sunni powers such as Saudi Arabia and Israel is only going to further aggravate the divide between the Shia and the Sunni power bloc. Because previously, the Palestine issue was one issue which was uniting the Arab world, irrespective of the Shia-Sunni divide. But now the axis that has emerged between US, Saudi Arabia and Israel isolates the other regional powers, that is Iran and Turkey. And the latest tensions of these countries with US, Saudi Arabia and Israel is only going to further increase volatility in the region. In the middle of this, Russia and China sense an opportunity, and they are trying to capitalize on the declining influence of the US in West Asia, and hence both the countries have started stepping up their strategic and economic engagement in the West Asia region. Both Russia and China are pursuing this policy, and that's the reason why they have stepped up their economic and strategic engagement with Iran and Turkey. Recently, Russia and Turkey have resolved some of the issues that they had, and China has committed to become a strategic and economic partner for Iran by promising to sign the proposed 25-year strategic cooperation agreement. So what you can see is the rise of Chinese influence in and around India's neighborhood, and it is not just limited to the Indo-Pacific region, but it can be witnessed across Central Asia, Eurasia, West Asia and even South Asia, and more importantly, the Indian Ocean region as well. The writer says that in the midst of these changing global geopolitics, India has made a few wrong foreign policy choices in the last few years, which has left India isolated, leading to a significant drop in its foreign policy capabilities and in its influence. The writer points out that there was a time when several countries would seek out India's advice on sensitive geopolitical issues, but this is no longer happening because most countries have started to look at India as an ally of the United States. This is where the writer criticizes the erosion in India's principle of strategic autonomy, which is the very bedrock of Indian foreign policy. Under the principle of strategic autonomy, India had always remained independent and autonomous while making its foreign policy choices, and it used to pursue independent relations with all the countries without falling under the pressure of geopolitics. But of late, its growing dependency on the United States, especially in the defense and strategic domain, accompanied with India's willingness to fall under American influence, especially in issues concerning Russia, China, and Iran, have led to a decline in India's traditional influence that it enjoyed with Russia, Iran, and as well as its neighboring countries. One area where India has succeeded of late is with regard to Pakistan and its sponsorship of terrorism. Through coercive diplomacy, India has successfully managed to exert global pressure on Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism, and this is very evident by the global action being taken against Pakistan by organizations such as the FATF and the UN. But apart from this, India doesn't receive much support at the global level, and this has isolated India in the region and as well as in its extended neighborhood, thereby affecting its traditional ties, leading to a loss of influence in these countries. But now that India occupies a non-permanent seat at the UN Security Council for a period of 2 years, it gives India an opportunity to realign and rebalance its foreign policy without being excessively dependent on one country such as the US, and without compromising on its principle of strategic autonomy. Even with regard to regional geopolitics of South Asia and the Indian Ocean region, India has lost a lot of influence, especially in countries such as Nepal, and the impact is clearly evident from the ongoing border dispute between the two countries. Over the years, Nepal's strategic closeness with China has grown, and it has reached an extent where China was recently seen to be assisting Nepal in order to help the country resolve an internal crisis that it recently witnessed. Traditionally, this role was being performed by India, and it marks the declining influence and isolation of India in the region. But however, credit should be given to the government for revamping its ties with Bangladesh, Myanmar, and with several Indian Ocean countries such as Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, etc. India's ties with these countries had started to suffer because of the rising strategic influence of China, but thanks to timely foreign policy intervention by India, it has managed to regain some of its influence. But however, it has still not managed to entirely cut out Chinese influence in South Asia and Indian Ocean region, which traditionally were seen as India's strategic backyards. China continues to remain a predominant influence in all these countries, but however, India has been able to recover its lost ground, and this marks the only positive development for India's foreign policy. The writer concludes by saying that the decline in India's influence and its isolation is a result of its ideational vacuum. Apart from an erosion seen in India's principle of strategic autonomy, there has also been an erosion in India's commitments to certain ideals. This can be witnessed by the sidelining of few multilateral organizations by India. See, India had played a key role in the founding of few institutions such as the Non-Aligned Movement and SAARC, and India was seen to be leading these institutions based on certain ideals. Under non-alignment, India was pursuing an independent policy, and under SAARC, it was providing regional leadership in order to provide for integration of South Asia. So India was seen to be championing such ideals, and these objectives were clearly being ideated in its foreign policy. Basically, India was clearly spelling out its foreign policy objectives, and it was actively pursuing them. But of late, India has sidelined the NAM and the SAARC, and in its place, it has tried to revive other organizations such as the BIMSTEC. Even though these efforts of India have succeeded to an extent, it still doesn't mark the establishment of India's leadership role in the region. Then along with this, India's decision to quit the RCEP negotiations further weakens its role in Southeast Asia and especially in the Indo-Pacific, where China is clearly asserting itself and is seen to be further cementing its influence and domination of the region. So in this context, the writer says that India's current foreign policy priorities suffers from an ideational vacuum, and hence there is a need to urgently reframe India's foreign policy priorities by resorting to competent statecraft and by adopting prudent policies that would be in line with India's national interests, and by pursuing a set of realistic objectives that are achievable. Now let's take up another column from page number 6. In this column, the writers highlight how important it is for the government to engage in public consultation in order to deliver on good governance. See, the very foundation of a democracy is based on the government's willingness to listen to its people. The listening will happen only when the government is willing to consult and engage with the public and hold a dialogue with them and constructively take into consideration the feedback that is provided through these consultations. The writers say that this is absolutely essential while the government is drafting laws and as well as while it is implementing schemes. This argument comes up in the context of the massive protests that we are witnessing against the farm laws. Through the new farm laws, the government is seeking to introduce major reforms in agriculture marketing, and as per the government, these reforms have been designed in order to benefit the farmers and boost their agricultural income. So the question is, if that is the intent of the government, then why are the farmers who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of these farm laws protesting against them? The answer to this question partly lies in the refusal of the government to consult and engage in dialogue with the beneficiaries of any scheme or law. Say, with regard to the new farm laws, the government did indeed consult with some of the stakeholders in the initial stages when the laws were being drafted. The central government did consult with a few farmer unions and industry representatives, but however, it largely ignored the concerns that were being expressed by a few state governments, and more importantly, it failed to carry out widespread consultations with the farmers of the country who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of these new laws. So here, the writers point out that consultation and public dialogue should not just be limited to few stakeholders in the initial stages alone, but instead, the government should engage continuously with all the stakeholders, including the beneficiaries and the civil society. If a democratic government is looking to provide for good governance in the country, then it needs to display a firm commitment for continuously engaging with all the stakeholders, including the state governments, the pressure groups that represent their respective interest groups, the civil society, and more importantly, the beneficiaries. And this process of consultation should be followed throughout the drafting process of a law or a government scheme, and this consultation has to be continued during its adoption and as well as during the entire life cycle of its implementation. The principles of good governance mandates that engagement and dialogue with the stakeholders should be a continuous process which helps in establishing a feedback loop through which the government can understand the concerns of all the stakeholders and subsequently it can make the necessary course correction. The writers argue that this continuous engagement and feedback cycle was missing when the new farm laws were drafted and adopted, and this is the primary reason that is directly responsible for the ongoing protests led by the farmers. Then the writers go on to highlight how widespread consultation helps in building synergy between the government, that is the center and the states, and as well as with the beneficiaries, the civil society and the representatives. It is this synergy that is needed between all the stakeholders in order to provide for good governance and ensure the successful implementation of a law or a government scheme by making necessary course corrections in between. They further illustrate this argument by taking an example from Rajasthan and how the implementation of Manrega in the state should be a case study for administrators. See, the Rajasthan government is known for its proactiveness in holding consultations and dialogue with the public, especially the beneficiaries and the civil society, through the Manrega Samvads in order to ensure its successful implementation. In fact, Rajasthan has been at the forefront of implementing Manrega, and it has been successful in providing for socio-economic development and rural development through the scheme. Despite its successful implementation, even Rajasthan faces several issues with regard to the implementation of the scheme, and one such issue happens to be the rejection of payments. Because see, under Manrega, payments are made online directly into the bank accounts of the beneficiaries, and in a number of cases, payments have been rejected as a result of several technical issues and human error. There have been cases where data entry operators at the local level have made errors while entering data related to the Aadhaar numbers and bank account numbers of the beneficiaries. So this results in the rejection of payments by the banks even though the payment has been sanctioned and approved by the government. Then there are cases where the Aadhaar number of the beneficiary is not correctly linked with the bank account, and this again leads the banks to block the payment. There are also cases where the banks would have declared a few accounts and few Aadhaar numbers as dormant, and this again holds up payment at the end of the banks. So when such issues of payment rejections come up, the beneficiaries used to find it very difficult to get their grievances addressed, because first, they wouldn't be in a position to understand the complexities involved in the processing of payments. And two, the affected beneficiaries will have to run around between government offices, banks, and the local panchayats, thereby causing enormous hardship to them. So this issue of payment rejection, which was largely a result of technical issues and human errors, was affecting the rights of the workers under the Manrega scheme. So in order to resolve this issue, the Rajasthan government went ahead and proactively held a workshop involving all the stakeholders. The state government brought in all the officials right from the state level to the local level, and it went on to hold consultations with the bankers, the civil society, and the affected beneficiaries. Because see, in the real world, when a law or a government scheme is drafted by sitting in government offices, they won't be able to perceive all the ground level difficulties that might arise during the implementation. While everything might sound perfect on paper, when it comes to its real world implementation, several issues are bound to arise, and this is where continuous consultation and engagement becomes very critical. See, it's quite understandable that the government, the banks, and the other stakeholders cannot address each and every issue individually. When such systemic errors are happening, it becomes almost impossible to address each and every individual case, and hence what you need is a systemic solution that has been worked out by generating constructive feedback from the ground. Based on this feedback, the government will have to make course correction in order to provide for an ideal solution that can help in dealing with these cases systematically. So to resolve the issue of payment rejections under Manrega, the Rajasthan government held a workshop involving government officials from the state to local level, and it also brought together all the other concerned stakeholders, including the bankers, the civil society, and more importantly, the affected beneficiaries. Through this dialogue, the government came out with a set of detailed guidelines which clearly defined the responsibility of each and every stakeholder, and it also put in place a set of protocols and clear-cut timelines in order to monitor and resolve these issues related to payments. As a result of these well-defined systemic guidelines, the Rajasthan government has been able to clear payments worth around 380 crore rupees in just 1 month, and currently only around 2.7% of the payments are pending. Then apart from this, Rajasthan is also seen as a pioneer with regard to right to information, but it was observed that despite taking several good governance steps, there were still several hurdles being faced in making government information public. So to resolve the issues related to sharing of information, the Rajasthan government held a consultation with all the stakeholders, especially the civil society, and it conducted a digital dialogue through which it worked out a solution that eventually led to the establishment of the Jan Suchna portal, which today has emerged as a single platform through which the public can access information related to around 60 government departments and around 104 government schemes. So these case studies from Rajasthan clearly highlight the significance of deliberation and debate in keeping the soul of a democracy alive. This is why it is important for the governments to carry out constant constructive engagement in order to generate different viewpoints and be receptive to the concerns of various stakeholders. The government should be particularly receptive to the voices of the downtrodden and the marginalized sections, which of course includes the farmers as well. Now let's take up a mains related article. On page number 14, we have an article that refers to the financial stability report that is brought out by the RBI biannually. According to the financial stability report, the RBI foresees a major concern for the economy because of the growing disconnect between the stock markets and real economic activity. See, in March 2020, when COVID-19 was declared as a pandemic and when countries started going into a national lockdown, stock exchanges around the world witnessed a drastic collapse because of the drastic reduction in economic activity. This was an expected outcome, and it was a reflection of real economic activity in the stock markets. But however, a few months into the pandemic, stock markets around the world, they started bouncing back, and especially in India, both Sensex and Nifty they have increased exponentially over the last few months, thereby leading to stretched valuations of most of the financial assets. Many experts predict that the markets currently have become overheated, and they even refer to this as a bubble. Because even though the stock markets have started flying, real economic activity is yet to pick up and reach pre-COVID levels. And even without much change in real economic activity, the stocks of several companies has increased by a very large margin. And this disconnect between equity markets and real economic activity poses a threat to overall financial stability in the country. Now let's look at a few prelims topics. On page number 1, we have an article according to which the wildfire that was raging in the Dzukou Valley has been doused. See, the Dzukou Valley and the surrounding mountains are located on the borders between Nagaland and Manipur. This region is known to be a popular tourist and trekking destination, and it is also known for its unique flora and fauna, especially exotic flowers such as the Dzukou lily, which is found only in the Dzukou Valley. So at this location, which is of great ecological significance, a wildfire had been raging for 2 weeks. And finally, the forest fire has been contained due to the joint efforts of the state disaster management authorities of Nagaland and Manipur, who are assisted by the National Disaster Response Force and the Indian Air Force. Then also remember that even though the Dzukou Valley straddles the border of Manipur and Nagaland, both the states have conflicting claims, and this leads to a border dispute between them. Next, according to this article on page number 10, the Heritage Conservation Committee has cleared the Central Vista project based on the directions of the Supreme Court. See, the Central Vista project proposed by the Union government seeks to construct a new parliament building along with redesigning and reconstructing several central government buildings near Rajpath. But this project has run into a controversy on environmental grounds, and the Supreme Court had mandated that the centre must obtain clearance from the Heritage Conservation Committee in order to ensure that these projects do not damage the cultural heritage of the area. This Heritage Conservation Committee is a part of the Union Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and it is headed by an additional secretary from the ministry. So this committee has granted clearance to the project as mandated by the Supreme Court, and this allows the centre to proceed with the Central Vista project. Next, according to this article on page number 11, researchers from 2 universities of the United States, they have developed a unique drone that they refer to as the Smellicopter. The name of this unique drone is derived from its functionality because this drone has been built by using a live antenna from a moth in order to detect and sense the smell around it and thus help avoid obstacles. So this essentially is a biohybrid drone that represents a fusion of a biological organism or its part with robotic components. This is a nature-inspired technology that has been developed, and it is supposed to help in sensing the presence of several chemicals, including toxic chemicals in the environment, which can make the drone very useful in search and rescue operations during disasters and as well as in the detection of explosives. Now let's take up an article from page number 14 that makes a reference to a hacking group known as Turla. Turla is said to be a cyber hacking group that is involved in carrying out cyber espionage and cyber warfare on behalf of FSB, which is the Foreign Intelligence Agency of Russia. Recently we had discussed the SolarWinds hack in the United States, which had compromised thousands of computers belonging to the US federal government, especially in the defense and strategic domain. This was said to be one of the largest ever cyber attacks witnessed by the US, and the US had pointed fingers at Russia. Now, a few cybersecurity organizations and US agencies, they have brought out evidence to link the SolarWinds hack with the Turla group, which is said to be a cyber hacking group that operates on behalf of the Russian government. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, India's foreign policy priorities need to be reframed, critically evaluate. The second question, federalism and good governance need engagement between people and officials, as the Manrega program shows. Discuss. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.